today we were talking about the functions of the PDL. Can anyone remember what those functions are? What does it do?
To keep keep the gum, your gingiva attached to the bone and attached to the cementum.
Right, the cementum, correct. But then overall, the functions are, remember we were talking about the sensory and the support and the absorption of it. So when talking about support, how do you think that the PDL is going to support? By doing what? With what?
Like cushion?
With the cushion of it, but how does it keep that support, that tooth support?
The Sharpie fiber?
With the Sharpie part, with the ligaments, with everything else, kind of keeping it, maintaining it where it is. So we have the occlusal traumas, with vertical or horizontal traumas. That's what helps with that. So we're keeping everything attached, that tooth attached right there so that it doesn't move. Sensory. What do you think about sensory? How does the PDL have any type of sensory stimulation? What's in there?
Nerve.
It has nerves. So when we're talking about the PDL and talking about sensory, we know that the pulp, remember, has what kind of stimuli only?
Pain.
So it only has a pain stimuli. So we're looking at the PDL, and I want you to think, so if a patient has had endodontic root canal or treatment, why is it that they can still feel any type of sensation from there?
I'm guessing the ligament.
Correct.
The PD.
So the ligament, and then the bone itself also. So we have the bone and we have these nerve fibers that are in, surrounding, that's going to give us that pressure or that stimulation of pressure or temperature. So just think with the PDL, with the nerve we can only do pain stimulation, but with our PDL and bone, we get pressure and temperature. So that's why you're still able to feel any type of sensation after you've had endodontic treatment. And then resorption. So we were talking about that with braces. And we know when we have a long constant force to that applied to that tooth, as it's moving, we're going to have absorption of the PDL and bone, and then we're going to have added PDL and bone. And we'll get more into that as well. Okay, so we have the components of it. So the majority of the fibers that are in the periodontal ligament are collagen. That's all around there. We have other fibers in there, but it's mostly made up of collagenous fibers. We have our cells, our nerves, blood vessels, and our lymph vessels as well. So all of that is in there, supposed to give us that sensation and that feeling, and then make sure that we're having that cushion and that it's protected as well. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about last week. We ran out of time. In your PowerPoint, so we're going to go over the different fibers. We have our principal fibers, which is also called our alveolo-dental fibers. They're used one and the same, so just remember both terminologies for that. They're both the same. We're going to have 5 of those. And then our gingival fibers and tooth-full exchange, and I think I fixed it on the PowerPoint, but there's only 2 because transcipital is just its own fiber in itself. So we're going to go into that. So we're going to go into our principal fibers, which actually keeps the tooth and maintains it where it needs to be. Where our gingival fibers, when we're talking about the epithelial attachment, yes.
I'm sorry, what's the other name for the principal? I was on this.
Oh, alveolo-dental fibers. Alveolo-dental, yes. So then our gingival fibers, pretty much we have some that attach the teeth, but one of them actually just kind of circulates around it just to make sure it's just maintaining the gingiva where it needs to be. So we have, remember that attached and that free gingiva, that's where our gingiva fibers come into place. So we have our 5 groups of our principal fibers, which go into our apical, oblique, horizontal, alveolar, and then intraradicular. And then there's an issue with here too, talking about intraradicular, but we'll get into that because I don't like the way it's drawn out. So location. If we start off talking about apical, well, we know that a PDL encompasses all around. So we have it starting at our cervical third, close to our crown at CEJ, and it's running all around our root to keep everything intact. If we go into apical, where do you think the apical attachment is?
The apex of the tooth.
Very good. This should pretty much all be standard for you. So this is what's kind of keeping that tooth where it needs to be. It's helping it from the lifting forces or extraction. So these are these ligaments. So if anything is trying to pull it, a vertical pull or force or lifting, and I think there's tilting on there as well, a little bit of tilting. But that's what's keeping that tooth in its socket, so where we need to be in that bone, right? So when you're doing an extraction, that's what a lot of times you have to go ahead and break those ligaments, and you have to tear it. Now, if the tooth is already periodontally involved, there aren't any periodontal ligaments, a lot of them. You're going to still have those at the apices, not unless there's so much, bone destruction that the tooth is literally just blowing with a strong breeze. Okay, so our next one is going to be oblique. So our obliques are right here, kind of like right above, or still in our apical third, but right above our apical. And it's once again, it's just keeping that vertical and intrusive. So intrusive, when we're talking about extrusive, is pulling it out. Intrusive is more still of that pulling and pushing. So we're still trying to keep that tooth in place by having these ligaments around it supporting it.
Do those run oblique also?
They are going to kind of run oblique.
Okay.
So, and that's the only thing. So when you're looking at it, you're thinking the way that they're at, they're running at an angle.
So it's like pulling down on the tooth to keep it
right.
in the...
Still that whole lifting, vertical, intrusive force that we're having, it's still trying to keep it from being, extracted or, what's the word I'm looking for? Avulsed. So when we're having it come out all the way. So going into horizontal. So horizontal is pretty much what we're looking at in that furca. So I want you to just remember that when those horizontal fibers and that furca and that bone destruction, we're looking at those x-rays and we can see that dark radiolucency and that furcation. Just think that those horizontal fibers are then now obliterated. So that's when we can actually get our furcation involvement. So when we start drawing, have you guys started doing that yet? Your triangles and furcas? Where are you guys at in theory?
We're
Are you guys still on?
We're in...
We started intraocular exams.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you guys are nowhere near that. Oh, wait.
Be nice if it would match up.
Just think of, so furcas are pretty fun. And so when you can look at that, you're going to pretty much looking at the best way. You can have furcation involvement in your maxillary molars as well. But the best way is when you're looking right here at one of your mandibular first or second molars. And when that gingiva, sometimes you can see it. So whether the resection or the gingiva has receded all the way down, it's just right in that furcation involvement. And when you get your probe and you're able to, which you guys will learn a trick when you're doing furcation, you'll pretty much use your 11-12 Explorer because sometimes that gingiva is already covering it, but there's that bone destruction underneath. So your probe is going to go down vertically, but you have to angle it to make sure you're feeling that furcation or that indentation of that where your roots meet. So what you're going to do is use your 11-12 and go in there to see if you can actually go through. If you're able to go through partly, you're getting stuck, then it's a certain classification if you're going all the way through. And then if you can see it. So if it's just looking like this, and you can look through there and be like, oh, yeah, I can see the calculus, then that's a whole different degree of furcation. But just remember there that those horizontal fibers in that furcation are gone. Okay, and so now we go to the alveolar crest, which is pretty much at the alveolar crest up here. So this is going to be resistant to vertical and extrusion forces. My outline and then your book kind of go into more detail of the forces. So definitely review. That outline is my gift to you because there's things that the book doesn't go into when we're talking about, even when we're going into dentin. But I have definitions for you and everything. So if you review that.
This outline, or is it the outline that's on our lecture schedule?
The outline that's here, that's in that, that's on your unit. So that's with the PDL, your cementum, all those outlines. So definitely review those, review the different fibers, review how the ligaments are moving, what they actually will resist, and then make your note cards from there. Remember, this is open book, but it is timed. So have a method to your madness when you're about to take your exam.
How much time?
60 minutes.
For 60 questions?
I don't know, because now I'm stuck. Because there are so many good questions I need to add in there.
Oh my
I was gonna say,
God.
you said you're going to do the questions similar to the ones we've had and not try and do the other ones since.
Right, but okay, so, and that's what I need to go over too. I know. I want to add in a cause and effect, but they're so easy. So I'm going to go over what I'm looking for with the cause and effect questions so you guys would know. And it's pretty much just reading it, seeing the because, and seeing anything after that because if that statement is causing what's going on in your actual, your effect. So it's just looking at it, seeing there's no commas, so whoever was upset about the commas, there aren't any commas.
So would it be a cause and effect be like the oblique area of the PDL dissolves because blah blah blah.
Yeah, so
Or-
if the horizontal fibers dissolve because furcation involvement has been periodontally involved.
And you would
Do
say
those, right. Or if I say the oblique fibers, usually disintegrate because apical fibers cause that, then that's it.
Yeah.
So then you would know, well, this is right, or you're looking at it and saying, okay, well, this effect is going to be right because if we have it, they can disintegrate,
but
but it's not based upon this.
Okay.
So that effect does not go with the cause. Or if they add up, then yes, the statement and the cause are correct.
So are those true false too?
Those
They're
are.
not? Okay.
like-
I was gonna ask if something's false, but like it still connects if it was the right word.
Yeah, there's 5 options for you. So it's both statement and are related. The statement and the cause are not related. Yeah. I mean, I gave you and I think it's still open on your embryology quiz.
Yeah.
Where if you go in there's a couple of cause and effect ones. There's 2 of them I put in there, so you can kind of play around with that. But the ones that I have are so super easy that if you look at it, so if you know this can cause this or this does happen, but it doesn't, it's not because based upon this, and you put them both together, then you know what the answer is going to be. And I wanted to get the easy one so that, but then, all you guys get it wrong. then-
could it be just say doesn't count against or for, but just throw it in there just to see if we can understand it?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's just so that you guys can kind of know. I mean, and
Yeah.
these are super easy.
So you're gonna make it if we get it wrong, it doesn't count against us, but if we get it right, it counts for us.
No.
Yes.
I'm gonna have you grade
I
some
like
of these
that.
exams. What I would like is that if the majority of you guys get it right, then I would like to count it. But it will be a consensus. But I mean, I'm telling you, it's such
Y'all better get it wrong.
it's so easy. But but if the majority, if half of you guys get it right, then I'm just gonna throw it out. Is that fair enough? Or do you want me to count it or not count
What do
it?
you mean
Not
by
there's
there's
don't know
5
what it is.
options? Like how can there be 5 options if it's just connected?
Okay, let's go over that in a second. Let me get through this, and then we have
Okay.
time. We'll
Okay.
circle back around because I want to make sure that Nikita gets everything that she needs before, and then gets to play Jeopardy. You may not get to play Kahoot, but you may. It's only 5 questions on Kahoot, so it's not long because Jeopardy's going to take us forever. Where are we at? Okay, so interradicular. What I don't like about this is that when I click on here, it's stating that they're in between the roots of teeth, but it's not. They're multi-rooted teeth. They're only on multi-rooted teeth. It's not, so this is looking like, so this premolar and this molar, and you have interradicular fibers right there. It doesn't. So if we were to have our molar right here, and then it's the interradicular teeth in between that furcation or in between multi-rooted teeth. So we have 3 roots and it's all those interradicular. So just know it's connecting the tooth to itself, but it's only for multi-rooted teeth, not for teeth that are, but this is exactly how it looks. It's just not neighboring teeth.
Are anteriors the only ones that are single root? So you do single rooted?
No. So you do have your canines and then your
Your
premolars.
premolars.
Can,
Or-
and you,
Yeah, that's what I meant canines.
right, but then your canine will be single rooted. It may have, your mandibular canine may have 2 canals. Your maxillary first premolar can be 2 rooted as well. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It just depends. But a lot of times, it's that in between. But those are the ones that can have multiple, besides your posterior teeth, that will have multiple canals. Canine usually only has the 1 root, but it can have 2 canals. It just depends on the anatomy of that person.
Okay.
Yes.
The premolars are the ones that some people used to call
Bicuspids.
but that's wrong because they're not always bicuspid.
That's exactly it. All right, where are we at now? Okay, so gingival fibers. So this is actually incorrect because it's talking about we have 4, which we don't. We have 2. And what goes on is that this separates it, and it doesn't really go into very good detail. So I think that's why I have my
So we just need to know the circular and the gingival fibers.
right, because those are the 2. But know that for gingival fibers, that is what the free and attached is made of. So the free and attached gingiva go into the gingival fiber group. And then you have the circular fiber, and then the transcepital are its own fiber and its own, which we have that. I have that it's in your book, and it's also in your PowerPoint and on your outline as well. So if I were to ask a question question, and I put out there that, pick the one that says is not part of the gingival fiber group. And if I have attached and free gingiva, we know that's still part of the gingival fiber group. It's just part, it's that one, it's encompassed into this one gingival fiber group.
And that was
The only one that wouldn't be in there, if we looked at here,
Is it
would be the
transseptal?
transcendental
Okay.
one.
Transseptal is like a
Say
whole
that
other-
one more time.
So if I ask a question and say, okay, which one, all these are part of the gingival fiber group except one, which one is the exception? And if I had this right there, you would pick, it would be the transcendental one.
And you said the attached gingiva and free gingiva.
Are part of that one group, but it's still part of the gingival fiber group, and that's what it is. It's, so you have your attached and your free, which here it's separating it, but it's actually part of, it's just
So
one
Yeah.
group,
attached and free and then circular.
and then circular,
Yeah,
correct.
it's on the sheet.
And the transcendental is its own group.
It's its own group that has its own
People in
circuit,
it.
so it's
So,
not
okay,
quite
right here.
part of the
And that's
gingival
the
fibers
free
anymore.
and the
When you've done
attached
more
and the
research, you
gingival
find out that it's
fibers.
actually,
Okay,
it can be
under
attached,
the
it's kind of its own.
Okay, so then I
And we
click
just
not.
need to know that
Not
it's
the
its own.
not
That's
also
why
it
it's-
is part of,
So why was
not,
it said
but
that
not
both
trans,
groups
not this.
Well, because this is a little outdated.
I rewrote.
So that's the only reason why,
Thank
because
you.
your book and everything else states that, and then going into more literature, there's only the two groups.
Which is the circular
And then the gingival fiber, but the
the
free and attached are, yeah, they
are in-
combine those
so
two,
you-
that's all. Because you think about it, you have your attached, which is at the base of your sulcus, and then you have your free there, so it's kind of all encompassing of each other. Here, it just kind of, separated it up, but you really don't need to, because it's still part of that gingival fiber, because it's the attached and
Yeah.
free, which is really close to each other. Did that. And then this just kind of goes into the enlargement, which doesn't really help much, but it just kind of, talks about where the free and then the attached. So we do know, like right here, the base is going to be our sulcus, and the base of that sulcus is going to be where our attached gingiva begins. So that's why they're kind of putting them together. There was something in clinical findings, we'll go into this, which is just talking about braces and forces. I want to say there was something, yeah. It's my PowerPoint. So yeah, here I think just a better picture, which is still, I don't think this is any better. But if you can kind of look at it and you
But
kind of
it
see
it shows.
where the fibers, are kind of going, then it's kind of looking at, so you see your JE here, and then that's kind of what we were talking about last time, when you're getting your probing, you're getting that bounce, part of your epithelial attachment, which is all encompassing of your gingival fibers. But here is why we have, you have your attached gingival fibers, and you have your free, but it's so close, you see? That's why they kind of just all put it together as one, and then called it the gingival fibers, because of where you're looking into the oral cavity, you're looking at that sulcus and the base of it, and then your free gingiva was kind of flapping around. They're all right there. All these fibers are pretty much all intertwined. And just know that your circular fiber, does it attach at all to the tooth? No. So definitely know that that's the only one that does not have any attachment to the tooth. It kind of circles all around and keeps that gingiva tight and bound, but there is no attachment to the tooth itself.
Where was the sulcus on that picture?
It wasn't labeled. It just had an arrow point to it at the bottom. That little arrow.
So it's kind of like an
Pointing-
upside down
It's pointing
picture?
into
Yeah.
the
Okay.
So yeah, you're looking, I know, here's your bone right here.
That's what I'm.
So if you're, I know, Sasha, you and your pictures, and you kind of just print it out and turn it upside
Okay,
down. And
cool.
look at it. Or look at it.
I just wanted to make sure I was looking at it right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right
it's
in here. And then
maxillary.
this is where you're going around probing, where you're going to be hitting.
That JE.
Yeah,
Okay.
JE. It's called GE.
JE.
Oh, I thought you were going to say GE.
I was just trying to.
Oh, okay. All right, so going back into forces. So we know that our periodontal ligament, our bone, and our position pretty much is what actually keeps that tooth where it needs to be. Any force applied to that is going to be when we're going to have any type of resorption of the bone or the PDL itself. So when we're going into ortho, and we have this picture, we have our PDL, our ligaments, actually all right around here. I want to make sure I don't get ahead. So we look at it in the way we have our facial or lingual, and let's say we want to go ahead and add a long-term constant force. to move this way, what do you think is gonna happen?
You're gonna have absorption of the bone on the lingual side,
Mm-hmm.
and then absorption of the PDL on the other side, because it's pulling it back.
So here we would have absorption of the PDL and the bone here, because we're actually gonna,
Pull it.
yeah, pull that way, we're gonna shrink that space. And so what's gonna happen here?
Stretches.
It's gonna stretch, and so if we're having more bone added, what is that called? When we have cells, osteoblasts, so we have the osteoblasts that add more bone. So that's what's gonna happen when we have this. So even though our PDL does not regenerate itself ever, just remember, because we have periodontal disease, that PDL is not gonna come back. Once it's destroyed, it's destroyed. Now there are new foundings in dentistry now that are trying to, regenerate the PDL, but nothing is actually, there are some things that are showing out there that are beneficial to the patient, but nothing is really concrete saying that it actually can regenerate that PDL for a substantial amount of time. But our own body itself, once it's destroyed, it's destroyed. But if it's stretched, we can deal with that as long as it's not broken, or if it's not torso-verted to the point that it actually breaks and tears. If we're stretching it, then we can actually compromise for that stretching and that compression as well. So if we go forward, and then we add force here, we have our apex. Wow. You guys already kind of know this. If you push the pin and you push that force in there, you're gonna feel that. So if you get it, and we're putting force lingually, you're gonna feel that force coming from the apex. And that's exactly what's happening when we're going into ortho. That long-term consistent force that we're adding over time is when we're getting that movement, so that bone can actually fill in that space so that the tooth can stay where it is. But you guys know retention is for life. So that at any point in time, when you're done at your final stage, it can resort back, depending upon how quickly it was, or the tooth could resorb if it's moved too quickly, because it's not enough time for that to make bone, for those osteoblasts to make, and to actually take up that space. So that's when we start having, the tooth itself is thinking there's a traumatic event happening. So it's trying to protect itself, and so that's when we have absorption of the root over long-term time. So if you see a pan of someone and you're looking at them, and let's say the person's in their 20s or late 20s, early 30s, and had ortho as a 10-year-old or a tween, and you start seeing that their anterior roots are just a little bit blunted, they're no longer at that apex point, it's because maybe there was too much movement too quickly. And a lot of times that can happen if somebody's in ortho, like regular conventional braces, for like a year, and they're just trying to move it as quickly as possible.
So what makes the osteoblast start reproducing the bone? Is it stimulating like a trauma because the
Right. So whenever there's that movement, then
it's like
just
trauma.
Like, yeah,
it's like,
just
oh,
like
something's
how
happened.
the pulp can, sense those nerves. We have those nerves in the bone, and so they're thinking, okay, well, something is going on. I need to make more. So just like how when our dentin feels that there's something going on with the pulp, we start having our odontoblasts start just firing off, in our cellular part to start making sure that our pulp is protected. The same thing happens in orthodontics when we have tooth movement, or when there's drifting. Because if you think about it, if the tooth is extracted and you don't have an implant put in there or some type of bridge, then what happens is that tooth automatically wants to drift. And so when it's drifting, it's changing into its socket. So you have that resorption as well. We have that bone trying to, overcompensate for that missing space.
And you said there's a name for that, specifically like the bone coming back and going.
Well, osteoblasts create.
It's just okay.
Yeah, so it's the same thing as everything. You have your osteoblasts, your cementoblasts, you have all of those, and you have the class as well. And the class is what destroys the actual tissue or the bone. Alright, so we just did that, and you guys figured that out. So now, let's go ahead and look. So when we have that force, and we have our whole periodontal ligament space, we have that compression, we have excess tissue here, we have this compression right here, and then we have excess PDL and then bone. So it's just not going to stay like that, because if it stays like that, it's just going to resort back, because that whole area is just saying, okay, well, I'm just here momentarily. And this is what can happen if there's a traumatic event. So if a tooth is loose, either because you hit it or you fell or you were in a car accident, that's why if you just, a lot of times they'll split your teeth to keep them where they're at, so that bone can go ahead and start filling the tooth back with that space, because it just kind of got into a movement where it's no longer where it used to be. But if you split it and keep it where it is, then it'll start healing on itself. It's the same thing as breaking a bone, which is why you're putting a cast, so you don't keep it moving and it can stay where it's put. So just think of that way. So whenever we have movement, either because we want it or because we don't want it, the osteoblast and then the PDL is actually going to overcompensate for those areas where that tooth has moved in that periodontal ligament, or I should say the ligament itself, the fibers. So here, we have here that our PDL is compressed, and then we have here that our bone is going to be compressed. So these both work at the same time. So when it's stretched or compressed, we're either going to give or we're going to take. So if we compress it here, we don't need that PDL that be as stretched as it was. So it's going to go ahead and overcompensate and make sure it fits where it needs to be now. It's not regenerating itself, it's just kind of restructuring itself, because the PDL is still there and it's healthy. We still have it, so it can give and take as it needs to be. But what also helps this is the bone. So we have the bone, that when we start building that bone, when that bone starts to come, and then we have a new position of our PDL. Remember, our Sharpie's fibers are going to be at the end of our cementum and our bone. So we don't have that long stretch anymore. It's going to go ahead and naturally shrink up as long as that attachment is still there. So there's no need to try to go in there and add an extra bone or try to do PDL regeneration. It naturally does it. As long as those Sharpie fibers are still attached, it's just going to go ahead and give and take as long as the bone compensates to where that compression is at. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, so we know that with ortho, it's just a long-term constant force that's added, and then our PDL will either stretch or our bone will compress and our PDL will compress. Both of them happen together. So you're not going to have bone compression and PDL stretching in the same spot. It's either going to be the bone compressing and the PDL compressing, or the PDL stretching and the bone being added into that area to fill that periodontal ligament. Are we green?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have our PDL. So when we have our PDL and our bone, they're either going to be compressed together or they're going to stretch together.
Okay.
They're not going to be vice versa. So you're not going to have PDL stretching and bone compressing, because it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
Our Sharpie's fibers have to attach to our cementum and our bone. So if our bone is being compressed, then our PDL is going to be compressed.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, done with that. So let's move on to some fun things, which I think was fun, you guys. Make sure. So I want you guys to definitely start making notes, because some of this, especially in chapter 11, you guys do not need to know until we start talking about teeth.
Will you go over the other components that's on this? Is this what you're getting ready to go over? It's like
For-
blood vessels, nerve cells, clast cells. I guess that's the like.
Well, yeah, that's just talking about the
Okay.
difference. So when it's going, let me see it, because I haven't looked, I don't have it printed out.
That's just that last little section of that group of the PDL.
Okay, the blood vessels up there. No, I mean, and a lot of this is just information for you to know, for you to keep for your boards, because
Okay.
a lot of this we don't really have to go over, but I have to let you have it, just in
Okay.
case it is put up in there. And it's easier for me to do it this way, and then have you have a short little synopsis of it than trying to read through and do
Okay.
research on it.
So
Yes.
with those then, should we focus more on your PowerPoints than on those? There's a lot more.
So with those, I want you to focus on the outline.
Okay.
Anything that's not in the PowerPoint, or that's, well, I shouldn't say in the PowerPoint, but it's not in the book, and it's on there, so like when I go into pulp zones and things like that on the pulpal one, that I need for you to know. So I made a little list of some things that, and we'll go over some of these with this, but for your PDL, I want you to know about the radiographic findings of the PDL, so what it looks like, if you're seeing that radiolucency around there and that little fuzziness radiographically, that's what I want you to look for when you're looking at it radiographically. There's also one on there under outline in your lecture schedule. It goes over characteristics, but it doesn't talk about radiographic findings, so I want to add that one in there. Accessory canals, which we'll go over a little bit more in a few minutes. What's the most common tissue on the PDL?
The collagen fibers.
Collagen fibers. So yeah, so just know that that's what's meant, but that's also on your outline as well. Going into dentin, there's circumpulpal dentin. So I don't think that's really brought up on the outline or your PowerPoint as much, but you have on your outline, you have the mantle, the circumfocal, and all that. And so just knowing what's being made in what. So in our primary dentin, we know that it's mainly made up of mantle dentin and then some circumfocal, but then in our secondary, the majority of that is all circumfocal.
And that's in our outline?
That's in your outline.